Welcome to the Legal Power Hour, where we jam 60 minutes of thought-provoking discussion into a 30-minute show designed to inform, awaken, and protect our fellow American citizens. I'm your co-host, Tom Scott, along with your co-host, Sarah Nahidi, and today we're delighted to have our guest, Dave Shestokas, on our show. He is a constitutional attorney with many years of experience in law, has a book out called Constitutional Soundbites, has a great website, and he's a great informative source of information. We were actually talking to him before the show. Very much looking forward to talking to him in the show. So to begin the show, Dave, give us a little bit of your background as far as what you've, why you got into law, I guess, and where you are today.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Tom. It's really great to be here with you and Sarah today to talk about the Constitution and its relevance in today's world. But I will tell you, as a bit of background, before I was a lawyer, actually, I sold beer. And I was a beer guy for a good chunk of my life. I probably delivered my first case of beer when I was 5 years old. My grandparents had started a beer distribution company, and I grew up there, and I wound up actually driving a beer truck before I drove a car. But the important part about that story related to this is that my grandparents were Lithuanian immigrants. My grandmother in particular was one of 11 children, and 8 of whom were killed by the Russians in Lithuania. And as a result of that, once she got here and had the opportunities that America presented to itself, she saw to it that even though she was born in September, we celebrated her birthday on the 4th of July because that was the anniversary of her American citizenship. And she considered that to have been the day that she was actually born. And it was from her that I got this dedication and love for our country, for our country's heritage and our country's institutions that led me ultimately, after a long time in the family business, to go to law school. After law school, I continued working the family business for a while. I ran for Congress in 1990, and shortly after that, for about 5 years, not long after that, I was a prosecutor in Cook County, Illinois. I was an unusual creature because I was a Republican prosecutor in Cook County, Illinois, which is a rare individual. And so that was a great experience. I did that for about 5 years, and then 20-some years I've done primarily criminal defense work. And as a result of that, about 70% of the Bill of Rights is devoted to criminal procedure and criminal rights and criminal protections, because the founders indicated that one of the biggest powers that government has is to take somebody's life, liberty, or property, and more often than not, that kind of thing happens through the criminal process. And so, as a result, I've lived with the Constitution in a courtroom for 25 plus years, both as a prosecutor and as a defense lawyer. Sometime, about 8 or 9 years ago, I started writing some feature articles for an online magazine, and I did a article about the Fourth Amendment and search and seizure issues, specifically search and seizure issues related to vehicles, related to cars. And the responses that I got from that article indicated to me that there was very little knowledge on behalf of the public of the rights that we have as Americans. And so I started writing more and more, and ultimately that became my own website. And then for about 3 years, I did a radio show, primarily out of Southwest Florida, up and down the coast in Tampa, Naples, Fort Myers area. I'm also licensed to practice law in Florida, and I was practicing there at the time. And about 3 years, I did the radio show. And for the radio show, we did promos that played throughout the week. We do the show on the weekends, and did promos that played throughout the week. And these promos would be like a minute of constitutionally speaking. And I'd get one question, like, What did Jefferson mean by all men are created equal? And answer that in 60 seconds. What can a president legally do with his pen and his phone? He would answer that in 60 seconds. And so I started to collect those constitutional sound bites, if you will. And those ultimately, I added to them, and those ultimately became the book, Constitutional Sound Bites, which in today's world, people are used to blog posts and tweets and short, quick answers. They want information. They want their information in short, quick, understandable circumstances. And mostly what you find about the Constitution is long, drawn-out tomes that that you have to read like cover to cover to relate back. And I wanted to give people information in a way that they're accustomed to getting it today. And that became the book. And we're real happy with that. And we're trying to educate people on not only what their rights and responsibilities are, but on the common American heritage that we share. This book is not written in a situation that's Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal. I'd like to think that what it is American. You know, I tried to, when we're doing this work, I tried to model some of this after thoughts of both Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine. Jefferson, when he was asked what he was trying to do with the Declaration of Independence, some 50 years after he'd written it, he said, you know, all I was trying to do was explain the common sense of the matter. And of course, that's the name of Tom Paine's book that sparked the revolution, Common Sense. And there is actually so much common sense in here that gets obfuscated day in and day out by people that have a political agenda and trying to say it means this and trying to say it means that, rather than just explaining the common sense of things. And I do think that if we understood what our shared heritage is, we wouldn't be near as divided or polarized as we are today. So that's kind of the background and introduction. That's where the book came from, and it dates back to selling beer.
Thank you, Dave, for sharing that with us. And I totally agree that if we focused more on what brings us together and our common history and why this country was founded and why people come here and establish their lives here, I think that we would be so much better off if we focused on what brings us together versus what divides us. So
I think you're absolutely correct. I think that people don't appreciate these days. These things are not taught. These things are not shared. I have a 22-year-old nephew that went through some really, really good schools and never had a civics class. You know, these things are dangerous. That they're simply not taught anymore. And I think it's important that we share them. And those of us that have a dedication and understand that it is common sense and we should be able to get along as Americans. Tom referenced my website. That's shestokas.com. It's the common spelling of Shestokas, of course. And I've gone out of my way there specifically to not be conservative liberal. Just this is the background. This is the history. This is the common sense of the matter, and we cover every bit of the Constitution from the Declaration of Independence through the 27th Amendment.
So, why did you write the book exactly? Did it come about because of sharing these, tidbits of information and your experience, or was there a primary motivation or reason behind wanting to write a book, or did it just kind of come about because of your experiences?
Well, where it came about was the online writing and the questions that I got that indicated the general lack of knowledge out in the public about these kinds of about our common heritage. And I thought, geez, somebody should be trying to talk common sense rather than necessarily talk about things that slice us and dice us. And I'm trying to make a contribution in the common sense. And I think that really, if people spend a few moments, they'll understand what we're trying to achieve, what we're founded for, why this country is different than every other one. You don't. People talk about terms. The term American exceptionalism that gets bandied around, and I think everybody kind of looks in the wrong places for that. When you look for it, it should be found in the concepts of all men are created equal, the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the idea of the sovereignty of the people. And these are the ideas that created American exceptionalism. They're not necessarily some of the accomplishments of Americans operating under that system. These accomplishments and contributions to the world are because of the system that was put in place.
I know you've spoken in your experience about being a prosecutor and also acting as a criminal defense attorney. And when you look at the Constitution, is there anything in that document that discusses prosecutorial immunity? And where, if it's not found in the Constitution, where did that concept come from and how did it begin?
Prosecutorial immunity is not something that's mentioned in the Constitution. You find that neither prosecutorial immunity in the Constitution, nor do you find something called sovereign immunity, nor do you find judicial immunity. All those ideas were created by the judiciary for a number of things based on some history that is probably inapplicable to us. It's probably inconsistent with the idea of a republic, where in fact the people are sovereign. Prosecutorial immunity derives from sovereign immunity, and sovereign immunity, of course, goes back to the idea that the king can do no wrong, and that because the king was in fact the source of law originally at one point through the divine right of kings and those kinds of concepts, and theoretically we junked all that, and in fact there's the fifth right of the First Amendment is to petition the government for redress of grievances, and the way it's written, it says petition the government. It doesn't say petition the king. It doesn't say petition the legislature. It doesn't say petition the judiciary. It indicates the government. And since we have these three branches, we should be able to get grievances redressed regarding all three branches. And so the idea of governmental immunity, dating back to the regal authority, is inconsistent with the idea of a republic. And so now there's the way these things have developed in creation by the judiciary. They have a variety of exceptions, and have separated an advocative function from an administrative function, and different kinds of ideas that, because one of the things that gets past these kinds of immunities is something called Section 1983, which is a violation of civil rights under the color of law. It's a federal law. Yeah. And in certain circumstances, you can sue prosecutors, but they have to be doing things that are outside actual court-related work. If there's there's limitations on these immunities. But the end of your question, Sarah, is it doesn't exist in the Constitution, And there's been all kinds of other justifications. Well, the people shouldn't have to reach in their pocket for taxes when the government does wrong. I'm not sure why that's the case, because of course we are the government, and so I certainly disagree with these concepts. On the other hand, there has to be some circumstance that allows prosecutors and judges to properly do their work. But if they properly do their work, they shouldn't be sued anyway. So, and I imagine that has there's something related to that in your guys' book, and the problems that arise from that concept. But it's judicially created; it's not constitutional.
Yeah. It's funny because when George Bush was in office, he allegedly said it's just a piece of paper, and supposedly, I don't know if that's true or not. We can't validate it, but certainly Alberto Gonzales, while he was at White House counsel, he wrote that the Constitution is an outdated document. That administration was kind of anti-constitutional. Another thing George Bush said, there ought to be limits to freedom. And I actually saw him on video say, I'm very, one of these gems, he said, I'm confident that every person has been put to death in Texas under my watch has been guilty of the crime charged, and had full access to the courts. Yeah, they had full access to the courts, but the Christians had full access to the lions too. So, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And and he even said, if this was a dictatorship, I'd be it would be a heck of a lot easier, just so long as I'm the dictator. So you gotta, even our highest leaders, you gotta put in perspective that whether they believe in the Constitution or not really dictates a lot of their policy. So to say something as ignorant as those statements made by Bush, granted he wasn't our smartest president, but when you say things like that, it's clear that he doesn't have a good concept of how our system truly operates, right? So
certainly those quotes demonstrate such a thing. On the other hand, I would indicate that he's not the first nor the last to not pay attention to some of the limitations. Certainly, the immigration orders that President Obama issued were in direct opposition to one of the constitutional commands of the president, that is to take care that the law is faithfully executed. And when you give people whose job is to execute and enforce the law a direct order to not obey the law, there's a direct constitutional violation conducted by the president. Sometimes it's just as important, maybe more important, to judge a president by his actions and by his word than by his words. But what you're pointing out is they're able to get away with this kind of stuff because of the general lack of knowledge on behalf of the public. And if the public were more interested and more understood, then I would suggest that the leaders would not be in a position to mislead regarding their authority or regarding these documents. Because regarding the Gonzalez quote that you mentioned, in terms of just a piece of paper, if that's all that is, then in fact we have no law. We were designed to be a nation of laws rather than a nation of men. And if there isn't some guiding principle, some restriction on the government, then we're not that. We're in fact just a law of men who seem to operate however they feel they can at that moment in time. And they get away with that. We're talking about the relevance of the Constitution. They get away with it because people don't know, because people are not educated. And I'm not so certain that there hasn't been a particular effort to write these things out of the common consciousness, because that allows people to exercise greater power than is granted to them by the Constitution.
But I distinctly remember as a child growing up, the efforts in my own public school education, whether it was from elementary school to middle school to high school, how much they emphasize, civics and American history and educating us about these issues. Do you think, is it not standard educational experience for kids in this country to learn and be imbibed with that knowledge and education? How is it that so many people are unaware of what the Constitution says and what it means to this country and what it means today?
I suggest that it's worthwhile for folks that have power to not have that education available to folks. As we were talking before the show a little bit, I was talking about my millennial nephew who went to some excellent schools. My sister paid good money for some of these schools, and he never had a class called civics. He never. There wasn't even one class called civics. And just I've got some granddaughters, and the same experience exists for them. That and one of whom's a sophomore at the University of Illinois, and they just it's not taught. It's not, the commonality of our heritage is not taught, and it's not taught in a way that when it's touched upon. There's new new laws of late, one in particular in South Carolina regarding teaching the founding documents. There's now a mandatory civics provision for Illinois educators that was just signed last year. There's new standards coming about to revive these instances, or revive this common knowledge of what our heritage is. But for at least you're obviously younger than I am, Sarah, so I'm glad to hear that you have that memory. But folks that are a bit younger than you don't seem to have had the benefits of what you refer to in your own education.
That's pretty disturbing, and I hope that either through, laws that are passed or revamping of, the educational system, that should be mandatory or standard education for every kid in this country.
I would certainly hope so. And it's not just, some of them, most of them have to pass this Constitution test before they get moved from one grade to another at some particular point in their career. But the Constitution test usually turns out to be watch a few videos from Schoolhouse Rock days and see how a bill becomes a law, or something like that, and that amounts to constitutional education. The Constitution is a philosophy. You have to kind of understand the Declaration of Independence to understand the Constitution. And certainly, if they teach the technical aspects of the Constitution, nobody ever really touches upon the Declaration of Independence. And one of the things the book does, there are 150 what we could call FAQs about the founding documents. And throughout the book, there's 140 references to the Declaration of Independence and how a particular amendment grew out of a grievance against the king, how a particular provision grew out of the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, how a particular provision originated to limit the authority of the central government, and how that all relates back to the Declaration of Independence. And what nobody is taught is the central philosophy of what amounts to the American creed. One of the other things that Jefferson indicated that he was trying to do was define and express the American mind when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And that is the driving force. You can find the effects of the Declaration of Independence throughout everything, the original Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Starting with the 11th Amendment, it's a little bit different. It becomes some technical things. Then of course, there's the continuing movement through the rest of the amendments of expanding the body politic, and the continuing movement to expand the body politic through the women's suffrage, through the abolition of slavery, through the protection of the vote for former slaves, and to the 18-year-old vote, extending the vote for president to the District of Columbia. Those all still grow out of the fabulous concepts that all men are created equal. They didn't get it all done when he wrote it, but the fact is the inspiration continued and still continues to this day, not only here, but around the world. At the time the Declaration was issued, it was the first and only document of its kind. And in the period since, in the 240 years since then, more than 100 new countries came into being, issuing a declaration built upon the Declaration of Independence that was adopted by the Second Continental Congress in 1776. And that's the kind of thing that I think people miss, is the implications not only for us because of the continuing inspiration that we have as a result of that, even if we don't know it, the continuing inspiration we have, but the inspiration that it has been for good chunks of the world.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like I have been reading your book, Dave, and one of the FAQs is how serious was the danger to the men signing the Declaration of Independence, and you give the answer in the book. Can you tell us about that answer a little bit? I'm just I don't know if people understand the magnitude of this.
Well, of course, one of the famous comments from Ben Franklin after they issued the Declaration of Independence, or shortly after the vote, was that, of course, at this juncture we will all hang together. We'll all hang together. Surely we're going to hang separately. But the fact is at that moment in time, they were committing treason against the king. Treason against the king had carried just horrendous penalties. The horrendous penalties included being burned, being disemboweled, being beheaded, but you had to be disemboweled before you were beheaded, drawn and quartered, and so they were risking this incredible torture that it was to be in place before you had your head cut off. And so the dangers to their lives, liberty, and their sacred honor, which was the ending commitment at the end of the Declaration of Independence, was just, it's unimaginable what all the king's men and all the king's forces intended to do to them. They didn't intend to put anybody back together again. They intended to draw and quarter them and take them apart and cut their heads off.
Yeah. Wow.
So, and by the way, that's interesting when we talk about relation to the experience. We wound up with the Eighth Amendment, when the Eighth Amendment banned cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah.
And one of the early decisions on cruel and unusual punishment by the Supreme Court indicated that at the very least, the Eighth Amendment banned drawing and quartering, being disemboweled, having your head cut off. The things that all these guys risked when they signed the Declaration of Independence really led to the adoption of the Eighth Amendment banning cruel and unusual punishment. And the definition that was given to what was cruel and unusual in those days was defined by these penalties for treason against the king. So that's how it all relates, and we don't understand these things.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we're running out of time here, Dave, but I just in closing, your book, you have how many books out now? You have the Constitutional Soundbites, right?
I have Constitutional Soundbites, and that's the prime book. What we're particularly proud of at the moment is that we also did the first book about the founding documents that's available at all in Spanish. There's 36 million some odd Americans. We got Washington in headphones on the Spanish version. We got Ben Franklin in headphones on the English version. And Ben Franklin would have been like the best talk radio host in the history of talk radio if they had it. Someday we should just do a show about Ben because he's a very interesting guy. But it's Constitution Soundbites, Tom, and it's available on Amazon. And I would hope folks would pick it up and read it and be able to share these ideas with other folks. Then that's certainly the goal. The goal of the book is to share our common heritage, not the things that policy matters are one thing, but how we all want to live our lives. There's the issue regarding natural law. And one of the concepts of natural law has to do with the fact that no matter what the government does, no matter what the government says, everybody really wants and desires to be free. That's why the 18th Amendment and Prohibition never worked. They tried to do something contradictory to what the natural inclination of human beings are. And so the basis of natural law is, so you wind up with natural law, and you wind up with the Constitution and the statement and the commitment to natural law and the Declaration of Independence. And if you don't see those things, you don't see what's so special about America, because we were the first place founded on an idea, not on tribal or blood relations or conquest. We were founded on an idea, and it's an idea that's continued to grow, and we can't let it die.
Right. Yeah. I don't think a lot of people today understand just the magnitude of the importance of the Constitution. And as you know, we write in our book, the Bill of Rights is pretty much being used as a doormat by judges and people in power. And that's what's sending us down this deadly spiral. We're going down the rabbit hole further than we should. And unless people like you and spread the word and people like average Americans listen, there's no end in sight. We have to correct this ship before it's too late. And that's, we write about that in our book as well. So they can get your book on Amazon. Are there any other channels where it's available, or several of your books, I should say?
Yeah, it's Amazon, Amazon.com, and
Yep.
it's Constitutional Soundbites. You can follow me for other information on Twitter at Shestokas. That's Shestokas. Check my website, Constitutional and Legal Education and News, and there's information there on the book, and it's just been real exciting and really great to talk to you. And like I said, look for Ben Franklin in headphones, because as I say, he was the first advice columnist in the history of the country, and you know about his quips and everything like that. He would have just been so good on the radio.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well,
thank you.
I'd like to wrap. Yeah, I'd like to wrap and say, catch our show fresh every first Monday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, or you can view it here anytime afterward, BT Network. Be sure to subscribe to our blog for informative monthly posts at www.stloiyf.com/blog. And be sure, of course, to pick up Dave's book. I have read bits and pieces of it. It is fabulous. I recommend it to everyone. And if you want to protect yourself to the fullest extent possible, certainly against our wildly corrupt legal system, pick up a copy of our book, Stack the Legal Odds in Your Favor. And please be sure to use the link on this page to our partner so that you financially support them at the same time. So Dave, I think we're going to have to do another show, but it's been fabulous talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Look forward to getting together with you again.
Thank you, Dave, for your time and your informative and lively discussion. And we look forward to having you on our show again in the near future.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Dave. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.